All right, hello and welcome to the Elixir Roundtable with Dockyard. Go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Elle Imhoff. I'm a principal software engineer here at Dockyard, and on my lap today is my cat Tempest.
I'm Bennie Rosas. I'm a software engineer at Dockyard doing Elixir in Phoenix, coming from a front-end background.
My name is Mike Benz. I'm a staff software engineer here at Dockyard doing Elixir.
Hey, I'm Zach Liss. I'm a senior software engineer here at Dockyard. It's not a camera day for me, but napping behind me in a basket is my cat Mo.
I'm Brian Cardarella. I'm the founder of Dockyard.
Hey, I'm Christian Tovar, senior software engineer here at Dockyard, and I'm just enjoying weather here in Colombia.
Hi, I'm Andrew Berrien. I'm an Elixir engineer here at Dockyard.
I'm Chris McCord. I work on Phoenix sometimes, and I am an Ember evangelist. Try it out.
You don't understand that that's actually relevant in that when that product came out, there were people not happy about the name. They were like, "I'm taking the name."
Yeah. It comes with Ember stickers and everything. It's pretty great.
Yeah. For anyone who is on the audio-only version of this, that is a mug.
Yes, I thought about that, but then I was like, it's going to make it even better.
All right. So
Regina has an Ember mug. They're great.
So I'm Nathan Long. I'm a senior software engineer at Dockyard. We got a few different topics we want to talk about today. One of them is a cool project we're working on behind the scenes, which should be public before too long. Another is some work that we're hoping to do in open source. And then we want to have a conversation about code quality tools and maybe touch on some Elixir release, some recent Elixir language features. So I'm going to hand it off to Mike first to talk about a project he's been working on.
Yeah, well, actually,
Mike, do you want me to give the high level?
You go for the high level.
Yeah. All right. So Mike's been doing the actual work. I just come up with great ideas that great being a very subjective term. All right, I come up with ideas, things. Anyway, so a couple, maybe actually at this point, last year or 2 years ago, I've lost track of time. In event of with everything going on, but I was on the Elixir Wizards podcast at some point, and at the end of the podcast, I think that they just have a general question that they ask all their guests on, like, what is one thing that you wish you saw in the Elixir community? And I had thought about this for a while, and so I brought it up that I would like to see a CMS built in LiveView, not necessarily from the page building side of things, but more from the content serving side of things. And the value there, I think, is really, who are using CMSs the most. It's primarily, they're very content heavy sites, and content heavy sites rely upon PageRank and SEO. And a lot of the performance and usability benefits that LiveView is providing are a lot of the same, user benefits that progressive web apps provide. And these are things that the Google crawler, through Lighthouse ranking and such, are taking in consideration for as part of their PageRank algorithm. Of course, we don't know, how that breaks down, but we do know that application performance is part of it. And so our kind of position here at Dockyard is that LiveView applications are faster to write. And we believe that we can offer a bit of a differentiator here in the space. And so no one kind of took up the cause of doing it, or there were some people that, thought I meant one thing about a LiveView CMS and kind of went in a different direction. They wanted to provide like an API that any front end could then render out. I'm like, nah, that's really not, other people have already done that. Where's the value there? I don't mind to discourage those efforts, just that from what I would like to see is something that is kind of like full stack pure within LiveView. And Mike offered to allow Dockyard to buy back PTO time in order to work on this. Adam at Dockyard, who's not on the call, he actually had started some of this a while back, but he decided that he wants to focus on his managerial career within Dockyard. And the amount of time necessary to develop this, we needed someone on it full time for at least a period to kind of build out a proof of concept that this is, not only possible, but is going to maintain the performance expectations that we have around it. So I guess this kind of came together pretty quickly. It must have been like mid-November or so when Mike approached me and said, hey, you know what, I have all this time off accrued. Dockyard wants to buy it back. I can work on the project. And so I said yes. And for the month of December, Mike's been working on implementing what has started out being called LiveView CMS. We are, and by the time that hopefully you see this video, we'll have renamed it Beacon. And by the end of December, we're going to be releasing, opening up the project open source, be extremely early, like not really in a production consumable state yet, but at least it's going to start to show you the architectural concepts that we're heading towards. So Mike, do you want to kind of describe at least some of the features you've been working on and the direction that you've gone with implementation? I don't know if you feel comfortable showing off code, but if you want to, you're, good for me. Good on my end to show stuff off if you want to.
Yeah, so probably not gonna show off code right now, but as far as the concepts, the idea is that the core idea is to be dynamically loading loading into memory the peaks templates is kind of the core overview of it. And so the idea being that if you wanted to create a page, let's say, for example, you wanted to generate a blog, you want a blog and you want to design your blog however you want it, and then it'll drop in the content on the fly. You can edit a non-Elixir person, just through the web interface could create a template somehow, and then we take that template and we dynamically load that into memory, and then that template can then run with data on the fly. So you've got you're basically speeding up the rendering time by having precompiled templates being run. So that's that at its core, that's kind of the magic, and that's kind of been split out to being able to have a dynamically loaded layout. So from the top level of the live layout, it's going to you based on which site you're on and which page you're on, you have a different layout, and then you can have different page content. And that page content, it would, like I said, it would support both precompiled template stuff, so that stuff's going to be as fast as if you had written the templates yourself in your project, and then it'll also allow live assigns on the fly at render time. So
the where the kind of page entry at right now is very early stage, in the sense that Mike just has here's a text area and it saves it to the given URL. Where we're kind of iterating towards is getting to a place where content creators are not really going to have to even understand what Heeks is, or really get down into the nitty-gritty. They're going to be doing everything through a UI, connecting data sources for a given page, and then basically being able to drag and drop UI elements into that page, building it up, referencing out to LiveView components. And there's some security considerations there with executing LiveView code within the Heeks template. And so we have some ideas on how to write a DSL in order to basically prevent any type of remote code execution that wasn't intended. It's looking pretty good so far. Like, Mike was able to take the existing dockyard.com and take the HTML from the landing page. Did you do the blog page too, or just the landing page?
Just the landing page right now.
Yeah, just the landing page, and was able to take that and render it in this fashion. So it's, I'd say the current state of it is it's moved the template creation over to a UI, as opposed to templates being packaged within the app code itself. And that's kind of the first step. And the next step is now providing an interface for us to be able to quickly build up templates, Heeks templates. I think that this is going to be a pretty cool project if provided if we can get the UI right. I done a little bit of research in this because Dockyard is in the midst of its own website redesign, and we looked into a few different options. Most CMSs out there tend to lean one direction or the other. They're very, geared towards marketing, content creation, or they're kind of more like the traditional blog post creation. And we have some ideas on how we can actually support not just both lanes, but also, custom lanes in terms of how skilled are your content creators. If you have, someone that is just, is accustomed to more traditional CMS page creation, we'd be able to support that, and potentially down to the level of more power users that are looking to do a little bit more functionality. The nice thing too with the LiveView is that we're going to be able to support like real-time data updates within the page rendering as well. And this is going to come about through the data source API. And right now it's a very early stage where we just kind of hook up. This is kind of like the interface through which we get data from the database. But we could be at a place, hopefully within a few months, where we're able to essentially, have real-time data pushed to each of the LiveView project clients for rendering out on the client. Within the browser client. So there are some things afoot, and I've actually been really impressed with the pace at which Mike's been working. We were talking about this the other day, like some of the just design decisions behind LiveView actually made the pace of this work, pretty quick. I feel. I don't know if Mike feels that way, but I feel like it's gone pretty fast.
Yeah, it's been good. It's some of the the core module loading actually is something that came from the Cobalt to Elixir work that I've been doing, and so that was actually probably the easiest part is actually loading the swapping new code in. But yeah, the design stuff around the layouts and everything and the components. So for example, right now I said we support layouts, pages, and components. And so the front page of Dockyard has it's a page with a layout, but then at the bottom towards the bottom there's the top three blog posts show on the homepage. And so the demo or the proof of concept now is actually going out live to the Dockyard API and pulling whatever the current top three are and injecting those in using components. So it's being able to work off of the LiveView stuff has made it much easier.
Yeah, I don't know if you mentioned this when you're describing the kind of the architecture a few minutes ago, but we'll just reemphasize that these are actually compiled templates too. We're compiling them at runtime. The custom modules for each for the site, and then the functions for the URLs are pattern matching upon the path, and we're going through the normal template compilation. We're just doing it at runtime as opposed to boot time, and page updates are properly recompiling the correct content, and then if there's any URLs that change, we are unloading those compiled functions out of the memory.
To be clear, that's not when you say runtime. It's not render time. It's pre. So if someone goes in and edits a page and saves it, it then reloads that into memory. So at runtime or at render time, when a page is requested, it's as though someone had actually written that template as a Heeks file and passed and compiled the whole project. So
Elle has a question.
At a cold boot, do you have to load all the templates from a database? So you're not planning to write the Beam files to disk so that cold boot is faster?
Correct. That if that's a useful feature, we can look into that. But as it starts now, there's a gen server in the application tree that reads all three, like I said, the layouts, pages and components out of the database and loads those modules. So
Nathan had a hand up, but it went away. Was that the same question, Nathan?
Yeah, I was yeah, basically the same question. I didn't realize how much was involved in this. I was thinking in terms of you know, like, I guess I just didn't really consider like users creating their own templates and then having to compile that and store that in the database. Like that's really impressive that that's working so far.
I mean, Mike had that done within like what, 2 or 3 days. I mean, that was one of the first things you did, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty simple to given you know, a string, just load that in as a heaps template.
Yeah. Elle.
How are you plan to handle like that the template could break because you update the component? You know, like
that's versioning components. That's actually something we talked about the other day. So right now, with a feature, and we, you know, for those not at Dockyard, we bike shed about versioning just pages in general the other day. And part of that deeper conversation between Mike and I was, okay, now we have components, and the idea was that, you know, we could have either components that are, you know, stock components that come with the CMS, or imagine, you know, we have, and this is going to go into conversation for the next roundtable, but imagine if we had like a Tailwind component library that gets plugged into the CMS. And so now I want, you know, Tailwind as my design architecture, and, you know, all these components are now available. But then if that gets updated and you import the new dependency, if the components themselves change their API in any way, that could break template compilation. We don't have a good solution for that just yet on how we're going to manage different versions of components, if they're even versioned in any way, or if, you know, it's kind of buyer beware.
I mean, one thing that'll make that a little bit easier is the fact that when you go to make a change, we know right away if this isn't going to compile. So that will,
right.
You know, you can.
I think sorry, I think Nathan has his hand up. I think Elle mentioned, I think Elle's, I'm speaking for her now, but I believe Elle's point is if the data is being pulled out of database at production, right? And, you know, it could work locally, but then if you go to deploy that updated component, maybe we don't have, you know, a mirror of the production database, and now, you know, particular templates failing in production mode. Yes, we're aware of, you know, that we just haven't figured out a solution for you. Nathan?
Another thing that makes this a really interesting technology for something like CMS is the fact that the first page load within LiveView is going to be just static HTML. So that's,
yeah,
you know, the crawlability
will be faster. Yeah, initial paint will be faster than a client-side application.
Yeah.
So we get both. I mean, that's a nice thing. You get benefits of both, right?
Yeah, and another thing, this may be an outdated comment. I know a long time ago, you know, things like WordPress, every time you load a blog post or something, it's going to go hit the database and pull that out of the database. I don't know if that's even the case with WordPress anymore, or if people typically use a caching layer in front of it or something. But one of the things that occurred to me when I heard about this is it'd be really easy to have a cache with some kind of eviction strategy for the most,
right,
you know, the hottest posts that are being accessed. You just keep those straight in memory. You don't go to the database. That would be easy to do in Elixir.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of get a bit into what data you want to be fresh all the time versus not. Like technically the templates themselves are cached in memory. It's just that they are not fully rendered templates. Like the data as implemented currently is still being fetched for the rendering of each individual page, which is no different as if you were to have a normal LiveView page in Phoenix anyway. And so, yes, there could be a potential if it's like a very content heavy page and we don't need, if we don't believe, like a blog post, for example, a blog post is not going to be updating very frequently. And if it does, you can just part of that update cycle, bust the cache. And then the next time it's faster, you can pre-cache it beforehand. So there are other optimization potentials that have yet to really be worked on. But I mean, as it is, I mean, Phoenix and LiveView are already pretty performant.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's two levels here. There's the templates that are being generated and pulled into code, which, like I said, are cached by the fact that they're in memory as functions. And then there's the assigns that then get fed through that from the data source on the fly. But one of the things you could do is actually on the blog itself, you could have a layout and a page that you have one, and that's your blog view page, and you stuff the data in for each of the blogs each time on render. Or you could actually, if you have however many actual blog posts, you could take that and generate that entire template or generate that entire page, one per blog post, and actually load that in as a Peaks template itself. And then you've got a single, there is no on the fly data source loading. So it'll be interesting to see where we go with that as far as, or what the options, or how people will use those options. Because like I said, there's that two levels of how to look at it. Is a blog post a static page that you render the actual thing into a heat, into a function, or is it a single template for all your blog pages, and then you just on the fly load the data in?
Elle?
To address let's make it simple. Let's say on a component, you add a new required argument. All the templates that use it, potentially years in the past, are now broken. That's what I was worried about. And so what you could do, and this is like a really nice thing in IntelliJ, is that when you change the signature of a Kotlin or a Java message, you don't have to say refactor change signature, which is what you used to have to do. Instead, you change it, and it kind of knows you just made a signature change. And so this little pencil appears on the side, you click it, and it's update all usages and fill in the values for me. But what that also means is that right now I'm assuming with your versioning, you're I changed the component, I version the component, or I change a page, I version the page. But this would involve doing an entire diff, and you have a change set, not in the ecto sense, but that you both change the component and the pages together to keep it, because you don't ever want to break a normal user's page. You don't want them to have to rush, because what you don't want to do is you don't want the user that doesn't know about Command F to go through every single page, open it up, and rewrite the page. You want the GUI to do that for them as quickly as possible.
Mm.
Yeah, there's definitely, so once right now, actually, just to kind of get things going, we're versioning pages, and we made the decision for now that components, there's no versioning on components, it's just the component. So we can get this proof of concept stuff out there. But yes, once we get into, most likely there'll be a component versioning process, and when you request the component, you can request a specific version of it. But then you've got to balance between, well, do you want to force people to request a version, or do we allow them to just say latest, but then they're going to break, and then they're going to have to go back and update it if there's a new version that doesn't work with them? Or do we always ask them to specify a version, and then they don't get new features without, so you almost get into kind of a semantic versioning of the components. But yeah.
So Nathan's asking us to move along. I think we should. I just want to close on one last point regarding the project. So if anyone's watching this and they're interested in using it, maybe it's open source by the time you see this. Just keep in mind that we are things that are not part of the project are things like user access control, authorization, authentication. This is meant to be plugged into another Phoenix application, and either a greenfield app and all you have is a CMS and it's up to you to implement those other things, or you have a product application and you need to manage some content marketing pages. We are by design just focusing on the CMS page creation and management side of things. We're not trying to re-implement any off stuff or anything outside of the scope of just the CMS itself. Anyway,
does this also address the WordPress problem of a lot of WordPress sites kind of evolve into a full like real product, but they started on the CMS?
I mean, to a degree, I have thought that. So a common evolution of CMSs is at some point it's like, oh, I'm like one step away from an e-commerce site, right? And I actually have all the values I mentioned for like content sites with LiveView. I think LiveView actually brings more value to e-commerce sites. I mean, there are plenty of case studies out there that show definitively that the less time it takes for users to navigate around an e-commerce site, the more likely they are. Well, what ends up happening is that users are more likely to spend money the more time they spend on your e-commerce site. And they're more likely to spend more time on your site if the pages are rendering in a performant manner. And, you know, with Amazon, that's not so much a concern there, but I mean, Christmas time right now, I've found plenty of e-commerce sites out there that are just like nightmares to use. And so while this is something I have in mind for at some point, it is, you know, very, very far down the road, but I do think that there's value in leaving it kind of in building the beacon in such a way to allow for more functionality to be built on top of it.
Cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that as it matures. That's really great. Benny, do you want to pick up on talking about components and LiveView and Tailwind and all that cool stuff?
Sure. So yeah, I'm building out an Elixir LiveView side project, and I just started having to nest a lot of components, and at the same time reaching for Tailwind. I noticed Tailwind 3 has been released, so it'd been kind of a back burner idea to set up kind of Phoenix templates with Tailwind built in. One issue had been like trying to match perfectly what you currently get out of the box with the new Phoenix project in terms of all the CSS that's there. So with Tailwind, for those of you who haven't used Tailwind, one of the features of it, which is also a drawback, is that it's kind of modular. Like you get distances in your like grid layout or in your margins and paddings that are kind of like a pre-selected subset, right? It's not infinite possibilities like you can with CSS. It's like, do you want it to be 2Ms or 3Ms or 5Ms or 10Ms or whatever? And you have these kind of distinct marks that are pre-made for you, and the idea is that you should use those most of the time. But sometimes you don't want to, and you have to do your own stuff, and you want things to go in between. And in order to do that in Tailwind before 3, you just create like custom rules for your iteration of Tailwind in like a config file, and then you can use those classes. But with Tailwind 3, you can actually just inject arbitrary what do you call units in any Tailwind rule. It can be a color, hex code, or it can be a number of pixels or percent, any valid CSS value. Really, you can inject it right into the class using square brackets, which we can argue about like whether or not that goes against the whole purpose of Tailwind, but it makes it really easy to quickly replicate an existing set of styles in Tailwind without building out a big config file that recreates a whole bunch of rules from scratch. So I was able to replicate all of the existing styles in Phoenix using Tailwind 3, and it seems to work pretty nicely. I'll hopefully be sharing that soon. But then we've just been kind of branching out of that conversation into what do we want a reusable component library to look like? Is it common enough to try to bake Tailwind in to Phoenix, or should that be up to individual engineers if they want to use Tailwind or not? And also looking at like Surface UI, whenever you make a component library, I mean, there's always this dream, right? I've everywhere I've worked has had the dream of like, we want a shareable, reusable component library that everybody can use, which is an awesome idea.
You know,
and
what the
one of the
problem with
problems
that
always
is,
comes
right?
up is implementation differs from project to project, from team to team. You know, you have to make certain
there's
choices.
also the issue of, I don't mean to kind of railroad, but
Come on
there's
in.
also the next new shiny thing. right?
Yeah, there's that problem too.
And so
But-
engineers are like cats. They're constantly reaching for the next thing.
Right. They're like, oh, we got to use Tailwind. And I'm a fan of Tailwind, but I don't necessarily want to impose that. And even within Tailwind, you have to make choices. You have to say, should this be a custom rule? Should it live in a class right in the markup? Which if you've seen Tailwind, you've seen these long strings of class names, right in your markup, and you can abstract those out by giving it a name of whatever button primary and making a button primary component that then encapsulates that long string of classes so that you don't have to put it in your markup anymore. Well, now you've basically made something like a CSS class, right? And one reason we like Tailwind and not CSS is we don't have to like constantly come up with class names. So it gets, even within the choice of tools, there's still like a lot of decisions and a lot of implementations that might differ from team to team, some of which are based on taste and some of which actually have impact on like what you can and can't do. So I don't obviously have the answers to that, but I'm curious what people think. And I'm also really curious about experience with Surface UI, which I haven't used yet, and how they might, how they've implemented some of these things.
So I can take it off there. So I think you mentioned a good point about like decisions. For me, Tailwind is amazing because of the decisions I don't have to make. It's a very polarizing topic, and I think people that judge Tailwind haven't used it by and large. But I think I'm getting an echo off someone. But the nice thing about function components in LiveView is like you can have your shared component library, and some of these polarizing topics go away because like your button is just a .button tag in the markup. And however that's done, whether it's using like a bootstrap class internally, like button primary, or class soup, it is the consumer of that component is just going to write button, and one place in the app it's going to specify whether it's button primary or focus ring outline one, the ridiculous amount of Tailwind classes. But I think for me, I'm hoping to get Tailwind. Yeah, this is like, we'll see. This is gonna be polarizing, but I'm gonna try to get Tailwind into Phoenix 1.7 by default, if things work out as far as our live generators. Like if things aren't too like class soupy. But what we're seeing in the wild with function components is like we can apply co-locate your classes, your Tailwind classes within the component definition in a single place in the app, and then the vast majority of your actual app UI you're building is not even touching Tailwind classes, CSS classes. It's just like a modal tag or a button tag, and that's building whatever you need behind the scenes. So far, I'm thinking that we can end up with live generators that even if you don't want to use Tailwind, you just go to the single place that is implementing the modal or the button in your code, and you just replace it with bootstrap classes or what have you. So we'll see where it goes. But the big thing for me to get this into Phoenix was the requirement of no node and no npm. And Tailwind 3 just shipped a standalone Tailwind CSS client with like pre-built binaries for every platform. After some many pleases and thank yous from Jose and myself and some other people on the internet, Adam, the creator of Tailwind, was able to figure that out and ship package binaries. So now you can get Tailwind out of the box in Phoenix with no node or npm.
So I've mentioned this to Chris on several occasions. I think that the nice thing we're starting to see with Phoenix is that it's really, if you haven't felt it's there yet, it's really close to the point where quickly building out proof of concept applications is like well within its wheelhouse. Like I think people look at the power of Elixir and Phoenix and they're like, okay, this is more on the production side of things. If I want to just spike something out, I'm going to use something quick and dirty. I mean, Phoenix is essentially there at this point. I mean, what we're really missing is more of these kind of community shared components so you can quickly drop in major pieces of functionality. But I mean, we're right on the precipice of having that anyway. And so, Nathan, this is your thing, but I think as a company, we should probably be looking at doing another Phoenix Frenzy sometime in 2022. and kind of putting that theory to the test and seeing if we can, really solicit some more community built applications and, really showing off how quickly you can build up, not just like simple apps, but, fairly, stuff that would have taken a significant amount of developer time in the past.
Sounds fun.
Zach has his hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think one of the things that I've become more mindful of as a programmer since like picking up and learning Elixir has been thinking about boundaries in applications and APIs and sort of like who should know what, and is this an implementation detail, and those kinds of thoughts. And when we're talking about these like functional components or components in the UI and how are these styles being applied, it feels like those same kinds of thoughts start popping into my head. And I really like the idea. I like what Chris was saying, how it's just a modal or it's just a button, and really underneath how those styles get applied is an implementation detail that we're able to kind of abstract away if done properly. So I think exploring that sounds really interesting, and I think there's a lot of promise there.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially when they are very small reusable things like buttons, or even like pieces of table cells, for example. The one thing is that I would like there to be an easy escape hatch for swapping out Tailwind with something else, or with nothing, with custom CSS, right? Because you'll have designers and pre-existing branding and everything, style guides and so on, and I don't want someone to look at Phoenix and say, oh, we can't use it because it's got all this stuff baked in and we don't want to fight against the framework.
Do you mean that if you swapped out another framework, the generator should support that other framework?
No, I have a couple ideas of maybe where to do it. I mean, it would be kind of cool to be able to like customize your own generators within your own project, but that's not what I was thinking. I was thinking that instead of putting Tailwind classes in the generated markup, you would put like phx dash button, phx dash modal, or some kind of generic class, and then reference that with like a Tailwind component that uses apply in a CSS file. And so I don't know, maybe a demonstration would be better at illustrating this, but you would, as an engineer or as a designer, you could easily say, okay, we're not going to use all the Tailwind stuff in this CSS file. We're going to replace it with custom CSS or whatever other front-end style framework we want. And then apply those because the post CSS and the @apply rule, it's nothing particular to Tailwind. It could be used for anything at all. So that's generic. And then it's just whether or not you want that @apply rule to be applying Tailwind, which could be the default, or whatever else, which you could just rip out the included classes and put in your own classes. That's one idea.
You'll kind of get that with what I'm thinking in my head. So we've talked about on the Phoenix team, like the actual app code that you write. So like our generators today, if you run Mix Phoenix Gen Live, we put as few classes in the markup as possible in our generators, but we still have to have some. And what we're seeing, like if we can properly componentize the app, the CRUD generators aren't that complex. So what you'll end up with is like a dot table or a dot button, and we've talked about like, could we have like a dot dash dash Tailwind and dash dash bootstrap or whatever, because ultimately it's just whatever the components underneath are doing. So I think that might be possible. I think the layout's going to have to necessarily be like have some classes in it. But so I think some like bring your own framework could work, but at the same time, swapping this stuff out isn't that difficult because like if you generate Mix Phoenix Gen Live today, you get some markup that generates like a live modal, and that thing is whatever div tags and PHX classes I happen to write that looked somewhat reasonable with the milligram CSS that we ship with. Like that's not designed to be long-lived. So like out of the box today, it's essentially throwaway markup in CSS for most people. Our goal was it looks decent. So I would say like we don't have the swappable nature today. So I think people will hear, if we ship Tailwind, people are going to be like, I can't believe you're making this decision and pushing on everyone. It's hard to rip out, but at the same time, no one is maintaining a milligram based app, right? Or taking our modal classes and then just like modifying it to fit their designer's requirements, or just rewriting the markup. So I don't think we'll be any worse off. And what we're going to generate into your app is these core components. So like the out of the box, Phoenix generates a table, a button, some forms, and a modal. So it's like you'll have implemented function component in your app with that markup in Tailwind classes. And then if you want to, the escape hatch in my mind at the moment is just you rewrite that markup just like you would today for your milligram app. But there is an idea on like if no classes exist in the code, as far as the usage of that, maybe we could swap it out with like a different generators. But TBD on that. We have to actually try to do it first.
Elle has her hand up.
I think in general it'd be nice if Phoenix had more pluggable generators, because like it always throws me off that the live generators are in Phoenix proper, and it also means that you kind of have to lockstep. Like to get a generator for the new LiveView feature, you have to release a Phoenix, even if the only change is in LiveView. And I know the only thing I can think of that has a pluggable generator system is, if I remember correctly, RSpec has that, where like you can say use this library for like my database layer, and then like it knows to look in that gem to get the generator, that part of the generators. I don't know how
Well, I
complicated
think
that is.
just
Though.
Rails engine supported that quite a bit. There was ways for you to override the default Rails generators and add on to them. I mean, I did that quite a bit with a lot of our Rails libraries.
Yeah, it's just brittle. That's why we don't do it today. I mean, theoretically, it's like we don't document it. It's like it's public. If people ask us, and so many people ask about this, like you can drop a in your project, you can do a priv templates phoenix.gen.live and implement or add files in there, EXS files, and do whatever you want. But we don't make any guarantees about the bindings that we pass to those EX files. So that's the big caveat is if we support pluggability, then like we're suddenly locked into what that major version of Phoenix was sending to the template, like the app name. I don't know. It's been a maintenance thing where we've been like, nope, we're special. And then because other folks like they could add their own like tailwind.gen.live, right? And it just generates a CRUD app that gives you different components. So we basically punted on it.
I've always been interested in how much time is spent on maintaining and extending functionality for the generators versus how many people are actually using the generators. And like the generators always make for a good demo and kind of like, you know, showing off the functionality of the framework. But I mean, I don't use generators. I haven't used generators for any actual production app code in a long time.
A lot of people do based on the client code that we see come in.
They do? Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, you'll have like list users, list posts,
Right.
and like it's used nowhere. They just left it in place. So I think a lot of people.
One thing I was thinking, I don't know if we included it in the last survey, but I do intend to run another ecosystem survey. Is maybe having that question in the survey: are you using generators? Have you used generators in the past year? Just for now, I don't know. Anyway, Elle.
I would say I use generators I know the generators do this, and I can't remember how to write the code, because otherwise I would just copy a file that already exists. And so I end up having like a throwaway Phoenix project to generate the generators to fill in the values. All I really want is a LiveView app I can go to on the web where I type in like the name of my app and it runs the generator. Here's the text. Like people in the Dockyard chat have said, I've asked them, hey, do you have an app that has this? Because like, especially when doing upgrades, like it is annoying to like have that side window to be like, okay, I need this generator because I'm missing some of the glue code, you know, like live helpers or something. And like, I don't realize it's missing. And like, that would be helpful to just have as a website so I don't have to generate it locally. Because I agree, like a lot of times the generators, I guess I haven't been on a client yet where they've been okay with the modal on index. I'm sorry, Chris. And so we always end up doing something different.
Yeah, I mean, part of I mean, you don't have to apologize. It's like part of the LiveView CRUD generators. We didn't want it to just be like what you would have with a controller, because like one, we're showing nothing that LiveView can do. So like part of that is also trying to teach like, hey, you can do like live redirects and push redirect and like do push state. So like a lot of it is like it's going to be app dependent. So like I don't think everyone should have a modal based thing that to update records. It's just an example of what people can do. So it's not necessarily anything that we're like trying to rubber stamp as the way to build UIs.
We should be able to know it's a Phoenix application based upon the design of the UI every single time.
Yeah, well, with Tailwind, that should help.
That's a bad joke. That's a bad joke.
No, I know, but I think with Tailwind though, the goal is like the Phoenix generators today generate just one modal function. So the goal is the generators on the next version of Phoenix, if we ship with Tailwind, we'll have like a standard set of like button, modal, table, and then that buys people some more time. So like if they want tables to look differently, they're not like the generators, I think will have longer legs than they do currently. Not that it's going to fit the app perfectly, but if it like already is using your customized table, then it's a lot more useful code that you can start with versus being like, well, I'm not going to run the generator because I have to throw it all away.
So I think at this point we maybe want to move on to maybe what should be our last topic. Maybe what should be our last topic given just time. But we had some discussion this week about Credo and the different ways people have used it and sort of what people want out of it. I know that that Mike has used it especially to help people getting up to speed. You've done a lot of things where like people are coming in that aren't familiar with Elixir, and you're sort of like, these are the guardrails. This is like the Elixir way of doing things. And it is Credo says it's primarily a teaching tool. So I think that's really valid, and we've also had some folks who are newer to Elixir say, I actually really want tell me what rules I should have because I want to know like what it should be telling me. But there's some tension there sometimes with what's actually required. So because you can enforce certain things with Credo as well. So to kind of frame this, like I think it's important to keep in mind, over a software career, you see things like test coverage. Sometimes people get like really fixated on test coverage or whatever. Like all the code quality tools that we have, whether that's tests or formatting or readability checks or whatever, are a means to an end. So the end is we're trying to make maximally useful software with minimal cost of making and maintaining it. So you can fall off the log in either direction, right? You can have no tests on your project, which means that you don't really have any confidence that it works like it's supposed to, and for every time you change something, you might be breaking stuff. Or you could go the opposite and try to get to 100% test coverage, at which point you're going to spend so much time working on and maintaining the tests that you're really spinning your wheels. And you could do all of that and still be making a product that nobody wants. So that would be a waste. I think Credo is, it fits in this realm of it's a code quality tool. It can be helpful in a lot of ways. I think that as we were thinking about this, I guess that opinions are going to vary a lot on which checks you want to run. If you're going to run Credo, you can go through the list. A lot of the checks even say, hey, this one's controversial, or this one is like just a suggestion. I would say you can put the checks in 3 buckets, and your buckets might differ from somebody else's buckets. But basically the buckets are, number 1, yes, this check should be satisfied. We should enforce this. Like there's no reason for you to check in code that doesn't satisfy this, or at least it would be very rare. So I would put something on that like there's a check for Boolean operations on same values. If your code says if X and X, like you didn't mean to do that. That doesn't make any sense. That would be a check that, and there's some others that are like safety things, like unsafe to atom. There may be a case where you want to convert a string to an atom right there in the code, and you might need to put like the little exception comment on it. And so like that kind of stuff will be visible. And if you're doing that a lot, then maybe you don't want that rule. But I think there's definitely something you would want to enforce. The second bucket would be maybe, which is like, I mean, this might be good advice, and maybe we want to see that, but we don't want to enforce it. The enforcement would be like, CI won't let this PR go through if you don't satisfy this check. The maybe bucket would be like, I'd like you to run this, I'd like you to see what it says, and then you can go, nah, and just ignore it, right? Because maybe it's telling you to alias something and you're like, I don't want to alias that, or whatever. And then the last bucket would be no, which would be, I think that satisfying this check would actually make my code worse. So those are the 3 buckets you could put the checks into. And like I said, different people are gonna have different opinions. So I want to talk about some of those checks and why you might put some of those in certain buckets. And then at the end, I want to kind of come back and talk about a workflow for at least dealing with the yes and maybe. And as far as like what goes in what bucket, somehow or other, the team's going to have to agree. So does anybody want to jump in with checks that you would say, this is really helpful? I would put this in yes, I would put this in maybe. I want people to see this, but not enforce it, or I want to enforce this, or I want to like actively not have this one. Free for all.
Nathan, can you repeat all that? I didn't get it.
I'm sorry.
I don't like when I get yelled at
Just joking.
for having to-dos.
You don't, okay, to do, yeah. Why not?
I like to, well, I mean, maybe this would be in more of like the suggestion category or something, but I've had, on a project in the past, we had like a pre-commit or pre-push hook with Git. And if I was just like pushing a branch that I was working on and not even opening up a PR yet, if I had like a to-do comment, it would block me from pushing, which for me, that like feels like unnecessary friction, especially when I'm like working on something in progress and I have some to-dos.
Was that rule in place because the to-do was being treated as incomplete work, or because a project manager wanted those to be tracked outside the code?
I'm not sure. I don't think it was the
I think
latter.
because Credo added the check and someone was like, yeah, we should check this. And
Oh,
then,
that's a pretty big check in Credo.
And then Chris McCord complained about it for 2 to 3 years and removed it on the project.
And then the no verify flag when pushing, and then we kind of kept rolling a little bit, but still, I don't want to have to do that.
Yeah. I mean that. So yeah, it makes the to do to me. The conversation should happen at the beginning of the project, right? Where are we tracking our things? Our actual work that we need to do. And to your point, having it on commit is going to be overkill, because, like you said, you've got to-dos that's you talking to yourself in the branch, but maybe have that on merge. Like, you can't merge into main if you've got a to-do. Like, that needs to then be pulled out and put into whatever the tracking system is.
I still like in-code to-dos because it moves with the code. Like, the Jira ticket isn't going to keep this line. If I split up the file and the to-do still applies to the function, the Jira ticket or the Asana ticket isn't going to track that. I like in-code to-dos. I know we've been on lots of clients, though, where like their to-do is old and they're never going to do it. So there is that problem. But at least my personal ones, like, I include it because I need to revisit this later. And most of my to-dos are actually like, I don't know how this works in the wild. I'll wait for someone to tell me about it. But it helps that Kotlin's to-do is also their unimplemented exception. So someone will report as a bug when the to-do is not done.
I think I agree with that. And yeah, so I believe you can actually, on the config file, you can set up like not actually failing, the status code for to-dos, and actually having those listed as, okay, you have 7, 10, or any number of to-dos to actually take, but I'm not going to fail. I'm not going to send you the failure status code. So that's definitely an option you have there, which is not like, hey, you have them here. Like, perhaps would you like them to tackle them soon or not, but perhaps not failing.
I guess it kind of, and maybe this is the core of the issue, is what is it to do, right? Like, is it simply a note to yourself in the future, or is it actual work that you need to do, but you're just not doing it right now, right?
Say a note to yourself in the future that may or may not be actionable work in the future. I mean, my opinions here are like to-dos absolutely shouldn't be flagged in the code as like non-mergeable because, as Elle said, they're going to outlive the issue tracker you're using potentially, but also they're going to outlive it and just where that to-do exists at all. But for me, it's like the bad to-dos that we see in client apps coming in are ones that shouldn't pass actual code review by a human. So like if I had a to-do in the app, like the last one I added at Dockyard was like, migrate to ERPC, which is Erlang 24 RPC library that replaces the RPC module when we upgrade to OTP 24. For me, that existing in the code should be in the code, and it's totally fine. Now, if someone opened a pull request and they had to do refactor this crap, which I've seen, like literally that not at Dockyard, actually when I was a Rails developer, refactor this crap, committed 5 years prior, like that shouldn't have passed code review, right? So it's like there are valuable things or not, but for me, the ones that shouldn't leak forever, or like to do fix me that tells you nothing, that should fail code review, but it shouldn't be the computer Credo saying like, oh, you can't merge this now because you want to tell yourself to upgrade OTP whenever that happens in the future.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this stuff, what we're trying to do is find the right things to automate, like things that someone would call out, a human would call out in a pull request, but you just like, you're trying to alleviate that workload. Like, hey, every time we're going to tell you to do this, let's just automate it, right? Let's just automate that suggestion. But I think what you're saying is that this is a case where maybe human judgment is required.
Human judgment is required to fail it. So I think my biggest grievance, I think Credo is extremely useful. And Nathan, I think that the way you said it, like it's first and foremost like a learning and teaching tool that can also enforce rules, is the way that sums it up perfectly. But I think that historically we've used it at Dockyard as like, here's the rules, deal with it. And I think a lot of the rules have been unnecessary. A lot of the rules that are otherwise helpful suggestions have been like, well, this is just the rule, and to do is a good example. So it's like, because by default, the Credo EXS says I can't have it to do, well, I guess I can have it to do. And I usually find out about it after I push and the computer yells at me. And then
just rename it to a tada. It's a
no,
tada.
I know. I mean, that's where we're at. So I think that's why this like bucketed conversation is helpful, because I think it's like maybe those to-dos are worth calling out if you're running Credo checks to see what it's suggesting. And you're like, oh yeah, some of these did leak long-term, but don't fail my build because I want to remind myself to use the more performant ERPC when it becomes available.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, I guess this is where I'm thinking, and maybe this is just simply the difference between spending more time in the code versus at a project management level, if that makes sense. But basically, so for example, the upgrade to ERPC when we require OTP 24. If you're in the code all the time, you're going to see that around the time that you require OTP 24. But if you're not, that could get lost, and you could be on OTP 30, and then finally someone looks back and says, "Oh, we should have done this 6 revisions ago." To me, that's where yes, the code's going to outlast the issue tracker, but the issue tracker is going to get reviewed periodically, whereas the code isn't necessarily. And maybe, and again, that's based on the type of projects you're working on.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never been on a project. I mean, it depends. Like in this case, like this actual case, like there was no plan to upgrade to OTP 24. So I guess you could put that in an item somewhere that would forever live in the backlog, never be assigned to anyone, and at some point would get picked up. But this was just like, hey, this new feature was released. We're not up to date on the bleeding edge OTP. So I don't know. For me, it's a long-lived thing that should live in the code. It's not like implemented this feature. It's not even planned. It's just like we know at some point, if this app lives long enough, we're going to be on, what is now bleeding edge is eventually going to be, latest stable.
Right. Yeah, and I guess that might get to my, is that really a to-do? It's a note for the future, a potential note for the future, as opposed to me, when I see it to-do, it's like, this has to get taken care of. Like it's I don't have time to do it now, but it's got to get done. And so maybe that's the difference there. And I think to the point that you mentioned about, so there's the require this, suggest this, and then don't mention this. One of the issues is if those ones that are in the middle of the suggestions that are maybe you should do this, but we're not going to require you to do that. Is that it kind of gets to, and this is something I've kind of thought more about as far as even like logging. Like when it comes to logging, there's to me, there are cases when you're like debugging something, you might need something, but if you're not going to if you're not going to take action on something, then it doesn't necessarily need to be logged, right? Like all it's going to do is throw noise there, and that's from a logging standpoint. But then from like Credo, what we've come into is projects where you run it and there's like 6,000 failures, right? And so it's like, well, it's not as soon as it's not enforced, they're going to start, that list is just going to start exploding. And so that, however, I think Nathan had mentioned there's a newer feature, the diff thing, which allows you to only run it on your code, which is better and more helpful. So there's that.
Yeah, I want to let Elle say something, but then I want to come back to that.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the concerns I have with the like suggested but not enforced one is you lose the ratchet. Like the code doesn't steadily improve, and it's the people that care about the suggestion that ends up fixing the suggestions on their PRs. The diff might work out okay. It's probably either doing a per file or maybe a per line. It's not doing like a subsection of the line thing. So I feel like the people that do the code cleanup, like myself, are the ones that are going to actually do those rules, and they'll fall into an old code base and have to clean it up, which will be somewhat annoying. And additionally, going back to, I actually thought of ones that annoy me that from the beginning is that the one about the function is too long and the nesting is too deep. Because sometimes multiple case statements make it much clearer what you're doing than like, I now have to throw this into another function way down here. It's off your screen now.
Yeah, I agree with that, Elle. So I think one, I will say you're absolutely right that the people that care about the suggestions will be you said we'll be the one to take care of them, but I would say like that's the feature. Like periodically, like at the end of a sprint or whatever you do, you're going to try to go back and pay it out in some tech debt. And that's exactly the time where you might want to look at the suggestions, but it doesn't mean that a lot of these rules, this is my biggest beef, they are possible suggestions that should be evaluated, not a prescription to improve the code, because they may not improve the code at all, or they may make it worse. So I think the problem I'm having is where every suggestion previously has been enforced as an ultimate rule, and then I'm making the computer happy, but making the code worse. And that's where, so I think you're right that only the people that care about the suggestions are going to look at them. To me, implementing a suggestion because you're forced to doesn't mean that you're going to improve the code. I would say you're both correct, but I also think that it's not a guaranteed improvement, a lot of these rules. Like if I use the alias twice in the module, am I making my code better by aliasing it and then using the alias? No, I'm just making the computer happy. So I think it's going to be case by case, and that's clearly what the suggestion is, like a suggestion, not necessarily do this because your code will get better.
So I want to talk about sort of there was kind of a conundrum in my mind about this, and this week I kind of realized, oh, there could be a way around this. So if you have a set of rules and it's just these are our rules, we enforce them, then that can cause friction for people that are like, I don't want to enforce, I don't want to do this rule, like you're saying, Chris, like I don't want to do this alias, like this is not helpful. On the other hand, if you've got a bunch of stuff that's optional and you're running against the whole code base, then what's going to happen is, let's say, Chris, you're like, I'm not going to do this alias, so I'm just going to leave that one. Then the next time, Mike jumps in on the code and he runs it, there's one warning sitting out open. So now he has to decide, do I go back to Chris's code and do the alias, or do I leave it alone? If I go do it, then I'm going to make the diff on my PR, confusing, because like, why did you go touch this other module? But if I don't do it, then next time I come back, I've got to mentally go, oh yeah, I ignored that one. And then next time it's going to be 5, and next time it's going to be 10. And then pretty soon there's going to be such a wall of warnings that it's completely useless. It's just noise, right? I can't even see what I just added. So the feature that you mentioned, the diff feature, I think might be the key here. So a couple of things. This is the workflow that I'm thinking about now. And to be clear, I haven't done this on a project yet. I've just kind of like tinkered with this on the side, and it seems like this would be a good solution for a team. So you can actually have different sections in your Credo config, different named sections, and you can run them with like -- or config name, and then whatever it is. You can call it required. So you can have a required config section, and you can run that in CI. And those would be just things that, like, if you're doing this, it's almost definitely a mistake. You're calling a string function like upcase, and you're not using the result of that. Right? There's no reason to do that ever. So delete that line or start using it because you have a bug. So those are the enforced things. And then you can have a section of suggested things. And the key here is you can run -- config suggested or whatever config name suggested, and you can do that on the diff. And what it does, as far as I understand, is basically you tell it, I'm diffing with the main branch, say, and it'll check out the main branch, run that Credo config, and then run it on your branch, or maybe opposite order, but it compares the two. And basically it's saying, which issues did you add? So if you're working on module B and Chris left a thing in module A where he didn't do the alias, it's not going to tell you about that. It's just going to be like, hey, the changes you just made in module B, by the way, you might want to do this alias. And you can go, okay, maybe not, do it or don't do it. And then you go push, and CI is only going to enforce the stuff that's required. So I think that that workflow gives a place for all of the maybe stuff you get to put in that suggestion area. Somebody coming onto the project who's newer to Elixir, who doesn't have a lot of opinions, they're going to run that, and whatever their diff is, Credo is going to give them a bunch of suggestions, and they're going to say, oh, I've got some what are those things, bumpers, I guess, that you put in the bowling lane, when you're bowling. I've got some guardrails. I've got something that's telling me I should maybe think about these things. Oh, I came from JavaScript and I'm camel casing my function name, and it's telling me not to do that. Okay, cool. I'll fix that, right? So that gives them some guidance, but it also gives room for somebody who has their own opinions to just say, I don't think I need to do that. I think that the place where there's a rub, so you've got your yes that's enforced, you've got your maybe that's in the suggested config section. The rub is, what about the no's, right? So if Chris is like, I hate this check, I never want, like, this check makes my code worse, and other people on the team are like, but we want this check, you can't even put it in suggested, right? Because Chris is like, no, don't suggest that. Or whatever, whoever it is on the team.
Suggested. I mean, I'm never gonna look at the suggestions, so go for it.
Well, but I mean, if you really believe that check makes the code worse, then it's suggesting to your teammates to do stuff to the code.
I mean, the alphabetical one, we can just call it out. Like, if you put make the code alphabetical, one, that doesn't make sense as a suggestion unless you enforce it. But you're basically hitting on the suggestions that I think are just demonstrably bad. Where, like, we shouldn't even suggest this because it makes things worse entirely, like always. Then yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, one example, like the Credo default config used to warn if you did like if user equals get user do end, and we convinced them to not make that a default. But that's another one where it's like, I would consider that fine always, and they should never suggest that it's bad, because the Elixir compiler is going to warn you anyway if you aren't using that binding. Like, it comes from like C, right? Like in C, people like used to disallow that because you meant to do a quality check but you didn't. But in Elixir, like, you're not going to have that kind of bug. So yeah, there are checks that just don't make sense to me at all, would never be an improvement, and those I just don't think should be added.
Does Credo, when you install it, does it have like a default set of rules, or is it up to you to opt in?
There's a generator that throws defaults in, and one of them used to be I forget what they called it. It would basically every new Phoenix stuff warned because we were doing like if error equals get error, and then we complained enough and they dropped it. But yeah, I think, like, I mean, they have to be opinionated at some level and give you some starting point.
I don't know if they do though. Like, it's like the defaults are always going to be somebody's defaults, right? And now, teams that are learning Elixir or fairly new to it, they install Credo because they were told to install Credo. And now the defaults that are, the rules are being imposed upon the project, maybe not even rules that the team decided. They're just like, oh, this is what we should be doing. We should be using Credo. Like I've always felt that opt-in, I think a rules engine in general is okay in certain cases because there are always going to be certain things that always come up on PR code reviews that are just like, okay, this has happened like 100 times. We just need a way to kind of, save our time and, just have something raise up before it even gets to the PR for us to review. I think those are fine, but I like the idea of the team collectively deciding what their lingua franca is and kind of, building their own rule set. Of course there has to be some sort of reason applied to there and you shouldn't go crazy with it.
Yeah. Well,
but the default rules are.
But Brian, you need some default. So like if you're going to use Credo, if it gave you nothing, like Nathan was saying, if you call a pure function and don't do anything with that result in the middle of a function definition, like the computer knows that that's not going to have any side effect and is wrong. So I think that's fine. So I think there are certain checks that like, are like, okay, yeah, that's the same thing to call out. Like you that does nothing, right? Like the computer should tell you when, like, just like a type system, right? Like the computer knows it's wrong, it should tell you it's wrong. So I do think there are some defaults that absolutely make sense for Credo to do, but it definitely very quickly spills over into opinion land. And I forget what the defaults are these days.
That's my issue is that, like there's the, I forget the rules engine in JavaScript, but I implemented it when I rewrote what was eventually rewritten for the JS stuff in Phoenix. I am pretty certain that when you install that JS rules engine, it starts with zero assumptions, right? And it's now up to you in the project maintainers to opt into the rules that you want to apply. I mean, there's something to be said about how permissive JavaScript is, and so it can get like really out of hand very quickly. Elixir is a lot more strict.
Yeah, I guess I'd rather have I would rather have a sane, very small set of defaults. Yeah, I'm the biggest complainer about the Credo tool, but I do think there are just too many built-in rules. I do think part of my complaint about this entire thing is so many things are off the shelf that teams are like we shouldn't even be needing to evaluate these things and bike shed about them. Like there are absolutely rules we can discuss, but like because it's a one-line thing to be like, oh yeah, let's alphabetize all functions and enforce that. And someone's like, hey, let's have a discussion, let's vote on that. And I'm like, what are we even doing? Like, no, we don't need to talk about alphabetizing our entire code base. Like, let's just ship features.
I mean, those are.
So I think there's a middle ground there. I think sane defaults where the critic can call out what's obviously wrong is wrong, and then yeah, you can have some off the shelf ones. But I feel like there's too many accessible features to ultimately bike shed over in an attempt to not bike shed like long term. So it's like basically how all of these linters end up going, where it's like the team is like, oh, we always bike shed about things, so let's do this linter so we don't have to bike shed. And then there's like 100 options to be like, okay, let's have a week-long discussion about alphabetizing functions. And then like, oh, sorry, you can't push your code because you co-located your functions together for clarity. And I don't know, I don't understand it. And go ahead, Elle, you had your hand raised for a while.
Oh, I was going to bring up that the reason why Credo can't have no defaults is because, Brian, they're just going to get bug reports that it's not working. Like, even software developers are kind of bad about configuring software. I have so many bug reports about them not reading the README or the prompts to configure the editor and being like, it doesn't work. It just makes the colors. I don't get any help. It's like, yeah, you need an SDK. Like,
I mean, I may be shooting myself here, but I can look up. Yes, ESLint may be inundated with all these type of bug reports that's not working. But my recollection is that the project comes without any defaults, and it's up to you to opt into it. And I would guarantee ESLint is like from an exposure is going to be a significantly more popular project and being used by a lot more teams than Credo and Elixir are. And so it's happening. It's definitely, and it's a fairly big project. It's been around for a while. So I don't know if I buy the argument that it is a bad idea, because there's examples of a very large rules-based engine in another language that's doing exactly this.
Yeah, but it's for the same reason that like Phoenix New generates Ecto and adds LiveView. Like if we could be like, oh, all we give you is plug and a hello world page, and then we're like, you can easily bring in these, like Credo. I think it's for the same reason, like they need to give their users an example of here's what a sane configuration looks like. So I think the getting started experience with Credo is well served by a default generator. Otherwise, you're in what Elle said, where you're just like, no one actually ends up using it. Like they add the dependency and then it always reports nothing.
So
you're like, wow.
I'll give
really
kind of
good.
like I'll give our own personal example of this is, and I brought this up when we just had, we were going over this earlier in the week in Slack, is back in Ember, Estelle, our director of engineering, I think this was her most popular open source library. It's called Ember Suave. And, it's kind of like a play on Rico Suave, and she had a picture of Rico Suave in there. And this was essentially just a rules engine that was an implementation of Dockyard's own style guide. But because it wasn't called like Ember-Dockyard-style guide, it was called Ember Suave, people started using, and we just published it because it's open source. Companies and teams started using it and just assumed that the rules that were in there were kind of like the blessed rules of the Ember community, and they weren't. They were Dockyard's rules. And so I would argue that the same probably exists for the Credo defaults. These aren't the blessed rules of the Elixir community. These are the rules of the maintainers of, these are the styles that the Credo maintainers want. And that's where I kind of come to, is that, you start with teams that are buying into it, and maybe many of the rules are common sense and good to have. I haven't reviewed the rules in Credo, just that you're kind of, everyone's buying into this as if it's the way, right? And I kind of feel like that's coming from a bit of an uninformed place. You're not really vetting the necessity of each rule necessarily. You're kind of, buying into the whole rule set as a thing. And I've always found for teams that rules that grow organically and are opt-in are always, like, we can defend those rules because we've already talked about them. And, when you have new people join a company, if they just went with the defaults, you may have people like not wasting time, but spending time, like trying to challenge the team. Like, why did we use these defaults? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And teams like, oh, that's what the default was. And that's not a really good defending position to be in.
So I want to get some input from, I can't remember when we were having this discussion, who was saying like, I want guidance from this thing. But I feel like people coming in to Elixir,
I mean, I would, I don't know if Credo is possible doing this, but I'm hoping that, in the future, our editors are going to be able to do this. But the number one thing that needs to be like automated away is basically calling out like code that blocks. And because that's like the constant issue we see with some clients, is that something's been implemented that's not really written in a way to take advantage of Elixir scalability architecture, and it's written in a fashion that works but doesn't, it basically makes Elixir looks like it's not performant. And this has been kind of like a long troll that not a troll, but we've seen this come up often enough that it feels like something that at some point the editors or a rules engine or something should be smart enough to call out. That, do you want to do this? Do you want to implement it this way? This is going to block. This is going to slow down your code. That would be far more interesting and useful to me than anything that is like, what's that?
I don't think that's going to be possible with any kind of static analysis.
I don't know. You take some.
If you need to correlate multiple files, that's called an inspection. I can do those in IntelliJ Elixir. Just tell me the rules
but the problem is like blocking, like the way we write Elixir is like, if you were in Node and you're like, okay, you're going CPU bound here and you're going to nuke the program, I get. But in Elixir, like we write blocking code intentionally all the time, exactly because we can, without slowing down the entire system. But the problem that you're talking about, Brian, is like if you have a web request come in and like it depends on like where the call site happens and like the context of like if you have a waiting caller on the other side, but it gets really murky because I could do a gen server. I could talk to a synchronous call into a process and I expect that to give me a response almost immediately. But if I do that from
right, but
1,000 callers at once, it could be problems. So like I'm just saying synchronous code is a good thing and we do it everywhere. It's one of the features.
It's necessary in order to manage.
It's one of the features. I don't know that you'll get static analysis on it, and I think it would be.
Hold on.
If the computer is like, hey, this isn't async, it's just going to end up people being like, okay, task async, and it's going to be not solving the problem.
Yeah, where I'm going with this is more in more intelligent tools that we're going to see coming about in the next decade or so. Like that's coming. There's going to be more implementation of machine learning. There's going to be more implementation of other natural language processing and such. And so the other day, I was pairing with Mike while he was implementing some of the CMS stuff. And that was the first time I saw that VS Code, what's it called? The companion or whatever, where like we'll figure out from GitHub. And it's like pulling, like it's a trained model based upon GitHub open source projects, right? And it was kind of cool. And then I'm watching it afterwards. I'm like, if the model, if Elixir is kind of like this language where you can foot gun yourself fairly easily with the performance aspects of it, are we going to be running into a place where like all these code recommendations and code tools are going to be basically injecting in these, garbage in, garbage out? I mean, it does come down to the model, whether, how good it is, but considering how simple it was and how impressive it was that it was able to do like this fairly complex code completion in the code, I was like, this is probably going to like be rampant for just like all sorts of performance problems throughout application code building.
I'm sure that's true. I don't think I think your desire.
The only way to fight against that is going to be automated.
But at least for Elixir though, it's like the halting problem in disguise, right? Like you're not gonna. I don't think it's actually going to be feasible to analyze and have the computer tell you that this is a bad blocking call. Maybe if someone's far smarter than that, like, cause like you don't know. I don't know. Like I don't think there's any there's no specification in your code to say whether or not like that call is going to ever complete in a reasonable amount of time, and it's going to depend on system load at the time. I don't know. I don't know that this specific case is actually feasible. But I agree with you. Like the more things the computer can tell me about my program that are just wrong, the better. But I don't know if this is actually going to be a feasible thing in Elixir.
Can I steer us back a little bit to where we were? So the use case of Credo, I think, especially for people coming into Elixir, that I was hearing was, I want some coaching here. Does anybody have that point of view that wants to pipe up and talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll just throw myself out there. Like I find it extremely valuable to get any kind of feedback. Clippy, squiggly lines under my misspelled words. Like, and it's not because I'm writing terrible code necessarily, but like I am coming from patterns from JavaScript, and so I'm going to do things. I'm going to make assumptions about how code should be written, and for Credo to wave its finger at me is really helpful. Maybe I don't need to listen to everything that Credo Strict is going to say, but it's for me, it's kind of a learning tool.
I could see that. That's how. I mean, some of the biggest blockers for learners sometimes is bike shedding on like code quality and like what is the way to do things, and whether or not what they're implementing is the best way. It's more important to just keep moving. And so if if implemented the best way is something that is constantly blocking you from continuing your education, then having something like Credo just to keep you progressing is probably very valuable.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of a chicken and egg. Like if that's what you're looking for, you're looking for like a coaching experience. Like I'm coming into Elixir, I want somebody to kind of tell me what to do while I'm learning. Then if you have to then go and figure out which checks to add, then like by the time you've done that, you already like learned those things yourself. So I think having some defaults makes sense. I think if you didn't have those, then it would just be a blog post somewhere that people go copy and paste those defaults. I mean, I think it makes sense to have some of those. But I think it really comes down to like there's this tension of like you want each team needs to decide which rules they want. You know, which rules are we going to suggest? Which rules are we going to enforce? But then the whole point of this is to minimize bike shedding. So if you end up spending a lot of time on that discussion, then like you're wasting time again. You know, it doesn't necessarily make your software better. It's something that can help. Some of these I think are definitely mistakes they're going to point out. Some of these are like, this might be prettier. My personal opinion is lean away from the this might be prettier stuff and use the things for mainly like you're probably doing it wrong if you're doing this.
Nathan, we come from the days, and Chris too, and maybe a few others in this room, where we would get really happy about aligning all of our assignment operators up on the same column. I mean, yeah, remember when
I'm still sad about this with the Elixir formatter, because like there are absolute cases. So I mean, I would align my assignments for sure, and I'm sad to lose that, but it's fine. But there are absolutely cases where I'm specifying a data structure in a tabular friendly display way that now just gets wrecked by the formatters. Yeah. I wish I could annotate, be like, leave this alone. But yeah, it is what it is.
I mean, it got pretty deep in Ruby days where it was like, oh, what other operators can we align all of our statements on? And that like treating your code as art, I've always felt like is it's a process that engineers feel like they have to go through to a degree sometimes, because you're in this code every single day and you're staring at it. And if it doesn't look the way that you want, that may be a mental block for you sometimes. It definitely is for me. But then, you know, after you've been around for a few years, that block of code, that class, that whole functionality that you spent looking very pretty for so long, business needs change. Toss it out, right? And now it's all gone.
Or you come back to it, you're like, what is this shit? So
yeah, what is this shit?
You thought was beautiful. But no, but
code is ephemeral. It's not. Yeah, it's temporary.
Going to what Nathan said though on Credo, I think for me, I think it's wrong. I know we've had discussions internally. I don't know where we landed on assessing the rules, but to me, I feel like it's better start with whatever Credo default is, assuming it passes on Phoenix today. I believe it does. Like same defaults, and then like it will be wrong to go through every rule that exists in Credo and say like, should we have this, should we not? You're basically inviting bike shedding and inviting pain. I would rather it be like, as a team, as we were reviewing our PRs, right, and we're like, wow, this is constantly an issue that we're bike shedding about. Let's go see if there's a rule or write our own Credo rule for that. Versus like, let's look at all the rules that exist and then bike shed to death every rule that's there. Like I feel like that's just inviting pain. Because you're going to be like, hey, do we need to alphabetize our code base? And again, that's a question that's never come into my mind ever in editing code. And now for the last 3 years, I've been complaining about it because it made it into our defaults. But had that rule not existed, I don't think anyone on the team will have ever been like, hey, let's alphabetize our code. So I think it's wrong to basically.
You're assuming that teams are democracies.
Well, no, I mean, and they shouldn't necessarily be in every way, but I just mean like it's wrong to look at every rule that exists and then evaluate it case by case. I think like go with same defaults and then go with like maybe there's something that we always encounter and we add the rule for it, but don't be like as an engineer, don't be like, what knobs can I turn? And then let's turn all the knobs we can. I feel like that's what we do by default.
How many rules does Credo give you by default?
There are a lot commented out, but there's quite a few built in.
40, 50.
Is there? Does it just like generate a template or the rule file into your project?
Yeah, it generates a config file that you can then customize. It's got stuff like separated into enabled and disabled sections, and you can configure some of them. Some of the rules you can configure, like I think the alias one, you can say how many levels deep does something have to be before it's going to suggest that you alias it, and so on and so on.
So there's about 90 rules.
Does it just copy the one out of the root directory of the Credo project, or is it somewhere else?
Yeah, so it's one of the one on the root. That's the one that gets generated. And so there's 90 total, and maybe 30 are disabled.
They changed it in the new version though that it doesn't generate a file that is just read. The new file is in overrides, because the old one would you generate it and then you wouldn't get like the changes in new versions of Credo, which it was problematic. Where like you would be using Credo and like nothing new would ever happen. You'd have to like kill your old file and like hand merge it with the new one. And so now you only need the things that you actually care about that are different than the defaults.
Wait, alias order is a default readability check. Yeah, see this. All right, I've been.
now we're code reviewing Credo.
What?
Well, I'm just saying it's been a while since I've looked at what the defaults were, and that's another one where I'm like,
I would say
rejects my alias.
Alphabetization is always a fallback to me, but only if there's not a better semantic ordering. So like, I would do aliases a lot. And this goes back to like how I wrote C includes is like distance of like you alias standard library first. It is the farthest away from you. Then you alias your dependencies. Then you alias like your dependencies in the same project or that like your company makes. So same project would be Umbrella or Poncho or like same company. And then you find the alias in project because they should win. They're the closest to you. And then, but like in a group when you have no better order, sure, alphabetize. But it's like the fallback when you don't have a way that makes more sense.
And
yeah,
by
the way that one works right.
Go ahead, Mike.
The way that works right now, if I remember correctly, you can it's alias within a group. So if you had a new line between two, if there's a gap between them, it allowed you to have each of the groups in order. But then there's also another check that will say, hey, you should have all your aliases together if you want that. So
so here's one where like this sounds reasonable. Like I'm not gonna die on this hill, but this is another default where like this doesn't add any value or make my code better or any of our team's code better. I agree with Elle's comment about like there is some semantical order that maybe makes sense, but like when I need an alias, I just go add an alias and I write my code. It's never been like, where should I put this alias in the existing aliases? It's never made my code better or worse. But what has made my life worse is trying to do a git push and then Credo runs and tells me, sorry, you didn't accommodate this arbitrary rule. So this is one example. Like I said, I won't die on this hill because I think it's a reasonable order. If something has to be ordered, makes sense. But to me, this is a case where like it provides no value. When I need an alias, I add an alias. Like I'm done. There's no more thought to that. And if I'm reviewing someone's code and there's like a diff, they added an alias here, cool, looks good, right? Like I'm not like, oh, but did they put it in the right place?
So counterpoint, the issues that I've seen with that is if everyone's adding all their aliases at the bottom of the list, that you start getting the merge conflicts mess around with that. And also you start having people duplicate. And I've seen files with like the same alias 3 or 4 times because it was added here and then it was much more added and then it was added here. It was one,
well, I mean, that's someone merging bad code. I mean, I don't think alphabetizing, if you have people duplicating aliases in a file, something has gone wrong in that module and in that code base. Alphabetizing the code isn't the solution to prevent.
Maybe that should be the check.
Isn't a solution to prevent bad code. You know what I mean? Like if there's so many aliases and code dependencies in one module that people are just like duplicating an alias 3 times, something's gone bad. And I don't think alphabetizing that has prevented. I don't think an alphabetization check would have been like, oh wow, this module is too large. I need to like think about refactoring. What's going to happen is if they're to that point, they're just going to start dumping more code in the file. Like this is where like we bike shit about these things, and instead of focusing on good design, it's just like Credo's not going to give us good design. It can only give us suggestions.
I kind of do wish the compiler would be like, hey, this alias is going to conflict. And Credo, at least the alias check now does that. It didn't originally. Would be like, oh, if I told you to do this alias, we'd get a collision. But I kind of wish the Elixir compiler would just be like, hey, you're re-aliasing this. That's dumb.
Yeah, I'm surprised it doesn't do that.
I mean, those checks have gotten better. It's like the compile times. It's gotten better with each time. So it's probably just something no one's gotten around to doing a PR for. Unless there really is a reason. I mean, the other thing, I guess the one Credo thing I would really, I don't know if there's a Credo check for this, of like, don't alias off an alias. And at least they tell you to put the imports first, but like, don't import off an alias, because everyone's human brain's going to be like, I'm directly importing that module, not like, is this an alias? Look at the alias. Okay, I'm importing that.
Yeah, I would be okay with that check.
One opinion that I do have is that like, when is the right time to check stuff? Like, whatever checks you're doing, you're checking, do the tests pass? Is the stuff formatted? Is Credo checks pass? Anything that's going to be enforced, my opinion is I want that to happen in CI at the time of the PR. And also have that as something I can easily run locally on demand, or whatever tool integration I want to use. I tend to just go to the terminal and run stuff manually. But like on our project, we have a CI task command that you run, and it does all the checks that we're going to do in CI. And so you can tell if it's going to pass. I mean, barring some weird environmental thing, it's going to run the same way. But what I don't like is when I commit or something, and then something is like, oh, your stuff isn't formatted, or you have a to do or whatever, because I'm still, this is rough. I'm on my branch. Nobody's looking at this yet. I'm just pushing code up in case my house burns down. Like, leave me alone. I want to commit. I want to rebase 10 times or whatever. And then like, when I make a PR, I'll make sure it's clean. I'll make sure the tests pass and everything's formatted and whatever.
Yeah,
that's just a workflow thing.
I like it last, mostly because my workflow with Git now is like, if I forget to run Credo and have to fix it, I do fix up commits and then do a rebase to clear them out so I don't have a messy PR. But I don't want them as they're happening because it's a rough draft. Like, I might end up deleting the code for other reasons, so it doesn't need to be perfect. And mostly I run format when I'm like, if I just run mixed format, this will clean the code up for me, and I won't have to do it by hand, so I'll just let mixed format do it.
Yeah, I think in past couple of projects we've had, it checks the format on commit, but at least for me, I'm running format on save in VS Code, so that it should only ever trigger if something went wrong. But yeah, it's. I think they similarly added JavaScript linting to make sure that's formatted too on commit, but then the full suite on push. Which again, you can no verify if you want to skip.
Maybe it's just the way I use Git, but like, I do a lot of commits. Like when I'm working on a branch, I might do 20 commits and rebase a few times and stuff. So I don't like I think this is the same feeling I have about, like, I use Vim and I don't use like language server integration and stuff, because I like things to feel really snappy. When I do get commit and I hit, the commit message, like, I want it to be done and I want to be back on the terminal in like less than a second. And like, whatever I'm doing in my editor, I want it to be really, really snappy. And then when I do my formatting, do my test, all that stuff, then I want to explicitly ask for that. But until I'm asking for it, I want my tool to just be as fast as possible. That's maybe a personal preference thing.
I don't do small commits because I've just found it really annoying to try to merge the commits at the end and make them the clean version I want for the PR. Like, especially because I know in most cases the PR will be multi-PR. So I don't want to have like the bug fix or the format here and I have to do it because then it'll be a conflict. If I do that, I feel like I spend the last day of like each PR just cleaning it up and getting it ready for presentation. So instead, usually my code is just sitting there not committed, so fire occurs, week lost.
Yeah, I'm more in that camp. I use the diff tool in VS Code to show me the branch as a whole, really. So I'm not, as soon as I commit, I lose that view of everything that I've been working on. So it hasn't, I'm sure tomorrow that'll bite me, but it hasn't so far. But yeah, and so for me, actually, as far as the having a snappy editor is definitely a plus. What I see I found myself, and I noticed that I was doing this after the fact, but basically using the format on save to tell me that everything compiled right. Because if I'm writing code and I save it up, and nothing like jitters around just a little bit, in my head I know something's not right here. It's not compiling because it didn't format. And so actually I let the tool format the code for me, and that helps me just as a like I said, it was totally subconscious that I was doing that and keying off of that. But so that's why I prefer the format on save. But preferences that was in.
Elle?
So I would say with mine, like leave it there. I know some people, Attacker, I've talked about this before, but they commit a lot because it allows them to like throw away work when it goes bad. I don't have to do that because IntelliJ has that separate local history that lets me go back after like every test run is tagged with like pass, fail, pass, fail, fast, fail. So I can revert easily like people would with git commits normally. And then on the point of the formatter tells me if it's broke, that is actually like the main test case I have for that. The decompiler is wrong because if I take the decompiled code and paste it and it just splats like way over there, like completely does not format, I'm like, oh, I messed up the decompiler. This isn't real Elixir code.
Nice. All right, well, let's wrap it up. This has been a fun discussion. Thanks everybody for jumping in and kicking these ideas around. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this podcast, then please write us an excellent review and tape it to the nearest utility pole, or better yet, use a stapler. Thank you for joining us on the Elixir Roundtable.
Bye.
Bye.